Good morning to all of you. And welcome here to the Stuart Lee Udall building and the L. Yates Auditorium. So on behalf of the Department of Energy and Secretary Chu, the Department of Agriculture and Secretary Vilsack, and myself as Secretary of the Interior, we welcome you to this Renewable Energy Conference, where we want to look back at what we have done for the first several years of our time in this administration, and we also want to look ahead with respect to what that roadmap should be in the years moving forward. At the outset, I want to acknowledge all of the people who worked so hard in pulling this conference together from all three departments, as well as the staff from the White House. I want to thank all of the stakeholders who are here, the CEOs from the private sector companies, solar, wind, and geothermal, the leaders from the conservation community. I see Bill Meadows from the Wilderness Society and so many others who are here. So I appreciate all of you for spending time with us today as we figure out a way of determining how we will move forward to win the future, as President Obama said, for the United States of America. The President's vision on energy has been clear from day one, and that is that we need to have a comprehensive energy plan. The underpinnings of that effort are grounded in principles which continue with this administration and are essential for the future of America. And they are about national security for the United States. They're about economic security, so we create jobs here in our country. And they're about environmental security, so that we can make sure that we are protecting the environment and dealing with the warming of our planet. So as the President said in his State of the Union speech just a few days ago, the clean energy economy is something which we believe in strongly, and we have been making happen and will continue to make happen. The President said that we would double the amount of clean energy electricity in 25 years, and we are committed to doing that, and much of what you will hear today and tomorrow are the ways in which we will contribute to that effort. Number two, we'll draw on a wide range of clean energy resources, and that includes renewables, it includes nuclear, it includes efficient natural gas and coal with carbon capture and sequestration. All that will count towards that goal. It also means that we will deploy and assist the private sector in deploying the capital to sustain and create jobs. We have some of the largest renewable energy companies in the world who are represented here today. They have capital that they are ready to invest in the clean energy projects of America. And we will drive innovation in clean energy technologies, and certainly with a Nobel laureate in physics sitting to my left, we know that the Department of Energy and his scientists and the rest of us in the United States are very much involved in trying to drive that innovation on clean energy technologies. So that's where the President wants to go. I want to just very quickly make a comment about some of the efforts that we have already undertaken, which I think have been historic, and at least for this department, we really opened up a whole new chapter and a whole new beginning for the United States of America. We, in this department, through the Bureau of Land Management and National Wildlife Refuge System, national parks, manage about 20% of the nation's land mass on behalf of the people of this country. We also manage 1.75 billion acres of oceans in the outer continental shelf of the United States of America. And in the history of our country, those lands and those oceans were really never harnessed for their potential for renewable energy. From day one, at the direction of the President here at Interior, we have been working closely with the Department of Energy and the Department of Agriculture to see how it is that we can manage that public estate to be part of creating that clean energy future. And very quickly, just reviewing some of our efforts in the 2009 and 2010 timeframe as we fast-track those projects to try to make believers out of those skeptics, to try to demonstrate to people that this was not about fiction, but it was about reality. We've been able to show some successes. In 2010, we permitted 12 renewable energy projects here in the United States for more than 4,000 megawatts of power. That's enough power to provide the electricity to over 1.2 million homes. In the solar energy arena alone, in which Bob Abbey and Steve Black, Governor Schwarzenegger, so many others were involved, we were able to move forward in huge steps. We approved 3,700 megawatts of power, which is enough to provide electricity to 1.1 million homes. And we also worked with the Department of Energy and Secretary Chu to move forward with a programmatic environmental impact study, which will allow us to develop the solar energy zones, those areas that are the most promising areas for solar development across the West in 6 different states. The draft PEIS was issued in December, and the comment period runs through March 17 of this year in about a month, and so we will have a programmatic way of moving forward as we move forward with an effort that is trying to make sure that renewable energy projects go in the right places so that we deconflict the issues that we sometimes have with endangered species and other kinds of issues that are important to the mission of this department and to the United States. And thirdly, with the Department of Energy also in the solar arena, we have set aside 25 square miles at the former Nevada test site where we are putting together a solar demonstration zone together with the Department of Energy. On the wind front, solar is obviously important as we do everything we can to capture the power of the sun. But we also need to remember and know that much of the renewable energy that is produced here in this country actually comes from wind power. And so we see great potential, not only in our public lands onshore, but also in the offshore. We have permitted 29 wind development projects for approximately 580 megawatts. We have more projects that we have under consideration for 2011. In October of this last year, I signed the first lease for offshore wind with the Cape Wind lease in Massachusetts. And just a day before yesterday, Secretary Chu and I in Norfolk, Virginia, announced a strategic plan for the development of offshore wind in the Atlantic. And so we expect that we'll see the flowering of the offshore wind capacity off the Atlantic and perhaps off the Gulf and other states that have an interest in offshore wind. Geothermal is not to be left behind, and for those of you like Neil Cornsey from Nevada, you know how important geothermal is for some of those communities. So we have 530 geothermal leases, which we have actually issued in this department, and there is energy that is being produced from geothermal. And finally, we know that the way that renewable energy ultimately will succeed over time is if we have the capacity to take the renewable energy from where it is produced to the place where it is consumed. And so with my 2 colleagues here on the stage, as well as with John Wellinghoff from FERC and others, Nancy Sutley from CQ, we have been putting together a transmission effort which has produced some results. Here in Interior in 2009, we permitted 475 miles of transmission lines across Nevada, Idaho, and California, and we have some other transmission projects that we are working on. So our efforts here today and tomorrow in this conference really are to look at how we learn from the efforts of the last 2 years and create an even better roadmap for the future. The clean energy future for America is here to stay under this president. It's an imperative of our nation. The nation that wins the clean energy race is really the nation that will win the future. And so that is why the president and his cabinet have put such a tremendous amount of energy into this effort. And it is my honor to be joined on this cabinet by 2 great people. The first is Secretary Chu, who came from one of the smartest and most important labs in the world and was whisked into this administration. And he and I have worked on countless things over the last 2 years, including dealing with matters relating to oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico and the Deepwater Horizon. But I can tell you there is no better colleague and no one who the President would be more fortunate to have as Secretary of the Department of Energy. And to his left, Secretary Tom Vilsack. Secretary Tom Vilsack from the town of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, which was his adopted town where he grew up as mayor and went on to become governor and did some historic things around the country. has been a strong voice for rural America and agriculture from day one. And I'm sure, as he will tell you in his remarks, whether it's in a cabinet meeting with the president or whether it's in audiences that we have talked to in places like Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and around the country, he knows how inextricably tied the future of rural America is to the clean energy economy, and how the clean energy economy is providing great opportunities to what was once called, when I was in the U.S. Senate, the Forgotten America, and Tom Vilsack has put that Forgotten America back on the front page. So help me welcome Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu.
Thank you, Secretary Salazar, and again, I would like to echo his feelings. It's really a delight to be serving on the cabinet with both Secretary Salazar and Secretary Vilsack. Let me start by reiterating what Secretary Salazar said about the clean energy race. The world going into the future will need more and more those technologies that can develop, that can generate clean energy, and the countries that develop those technologies will be the country that will be exporting those technologies. In addition to that, the countries that develop the most energy efficient infrastructures will be put in a very competitive place. And so we are working to unleash this clean energy initiative that President Obama talked about. It's going to occur on several levels. I think Secretary Vilsack, I know Secretary Vilsack will talk about how it could create tremendous wealth in rural America, and also to remind you that rural America is one of the generators of a large fraction of our exports and our economic prosperity. And that's one example. But what is the Department of Energy doing? Well, there's several things. First, we are, with the Treasury Department, helping to deploy renewable clean energy projects. There's a 1603 program which says if you can erect a solar farm, a wind farm, something of that nature, throw on the switch, instead of getting tax credits over an extended period of time, let's say 10 years, as soon as you throw on the switch, you can get 30%, you can get your tax credits in one shot. And that has been wildly successful. It's provided $5.8 billion of support for more than 4,700 projects. In many instances, the developers turn right around with that money and use that as a down payment for the next solar or wind project. And this is why we work with Congress to include the extension of this very successful program, which passed in December. This is going to create immediately new jobs and grow our domestic renewable industry. We also have been administering a loan guarantee program. So far, the loan guarantee program has committed more than $26 billion in loans and loan guarantees to support 23 energy projects. And there's an estimate that these projects are expected to create or save more than 58,000 jobs. And we're accelerating the loan guarantee program even more, but the number of solar projects permitted last year through the Department of Interior Fast Track was also something where we cooperated. And just as an example, the loan guarantee program issued a loan of $1.4 billion to a company called BrightSource for a 400 megawatt solar power station. And finally, in meeting the President's goals that he talked about at the State of the Union address, by 2035, that we could be generating 80% of our energy as clean energy, and where part gas is given half credit for clean energy. So just to calibrate things, if we look at solar, wind, hydro, and nuclear, we're over 30% clean energy. Now, if you throw in natural gas and give it half credit, we're about 40%. So to go from 40 to 80% is an ambitious, but we believe an achievable goal. It will create a market, and so that U.S. manufacturers can say, okay, if I build these things, if I invent these things, there will be a market to sell in. Because of the timescale 2035, we're also looking for a robust R&D program to actually bring these things to fruition. I'll give you a few examples. In solar power, right now, if you want to install solar power at utility scale, several megawatts or above, the cost, roughly, the full cost of the installation and everything else, the permitting, the land, you name it, is roughly $4 per watt. Now, $4 per watt, that power is still considerably more than energy generated by fossil fuel. Within the decade, industry believes it will cut that cost in half. And we have looked very hard at this and said, what can we do to cut this cost not in half, not to decrease the cost by 50%, but to decrease the cost by 75%. Somewhere between 60, 75%, there's a magic will occur. And the magic is it becomes cost competitive with any form of energy. And when that happens, without subsidy, it's going to shoot all over the country and all over the world. And so we looked very hard at all those technologies that we see being developed and how can we accelerate that to bring down the cost. We're doing similar studies in wind, clean coal with carbon capture, sequestration, to say what is it that we can do in order to bring the cost down where people stop thinking about where's my subsidy, but they just start thinking about where do I put it? And there will be no subsidy. And I think this is going to be a huge part. Again, I repeat, if the United States can develop these technologies, anywhere things like electric vehicles with batteries that can go 300 to 500 miles in a single charge, but take up half the space of today's batteries that we have, for example, in the Volt and the Nissan Leaf, that will have a profound impact because everyone will run out and buy one of these cars, at least unless you live in the country. Maybe in the countryside, you might want to drive more than 400 or 500 miles. But even 4 or 5, never mind. I want to digress. But in any case, I think that's what we're trying to do. We see enormous opportunity. We see enormous ability to gear up this great American innovation machine that the United States is and get us in this direction. And so we can not only develop those things for our own markets, but for the international market. And so with that, I will introduce Tom Vilsack. As Ken Salazar said, he has been indefatigable hero of rural America and agriculture, and rural America has no better spokesman than Tom.
Thank you very much. Well, it's certainly an honor and privilege to be here this morning with two great colleagues, and certainly appreciate the work and assistance and partnership we've had in terms of trying to create economic opportunity in a part of America that's extraordinarily important to all of us. It is the source of our food and our fiber. It is the source of 85% of our renewable water resource. Much of what we've talked about in terms of renewable energy and clean energy and biofuels and renewable fuels will be done in large part in rural America, which will help to create economic opportunity for the 50 million people who live, work, and raise their families in rural America. And to underscore the importance of rural America, one statistic that I give to every single audience I speak to, so that you all know, regardless of where you come from, where you live, you do have a stake in the future of rural America, is that while it represents 16% of the country's population, 44% of those who serve us in the military come from rural America. 44% of the folks who are deeply concerned about our security, disproportionate number come from those rural communities. And so it is important for us to focus on economic opportunity, and the President has developed a very good prescription to win the future. It's very simply stated. The President sees a government that spends less but spends wisely, an economy that makes, creates, and innovates, and a nation that exports. And what we're talking about here today fits into that prescription. When the government has to spend less but spend wisely, it becomes extremely important for the government to be able to leverage its resources with the private sector and work closely with the private sector to create economic opportunity. In terms of our innovation and creating and making, it really is about the opportunities that Steve and Ken have talked about. When we focus on clean energy or biofuels, we're talking about enormous opportunities, 8,800 parts in a windmill, just to give one example of things that will be made in the clean energy future. I come from a state, when I left as governor, was #1 in the country in terms of wind-generated electricity on the grid. And we saw an increase in manufacturing jobs because of that. a net increase in manufacturing jobs because somebody had to make all of those 8,800 parts. So the opportunity here is enormous. And at USDA, we're engaged in I would say, small ball. You know, we don't deal with billions at USDA, as Steve and Kent may. We really deal in millions, and I want to talk to you briefly about some of the programs we have, both in the clean energy area as well as in the renewable fuel area. In the renewable energy area, first and foremost, we have a responsibility to work with our farmers and ranchers and producers to see if there are ways in which they can incorporate renewable energy into their operations. So we have the Renewable Energy Assistance Program that provides resources, grants, to initially do audits of operations to determine how best to incorporate into those facilities renewable energy. We've already funded over 4,000 of these projects, and we, as a result of that effort, believe that we will save or generate roughly 4.3 billion kilowatts of renewable energy for these facilities, and we're seeing many of them be able to generate enough not only for their operations but also to contribute to the grid. We're working with homeowners in 5 states to take a look at ways in which they can make their homes more energy efficient. It's not just about generating more energy, it's also about making sure that we use it properly and conserve as much of it as we can. We intend to work with these homeowners through the Rural Electric Cooperative in these 5 states to provide resources in order for them to do what they need to do to retrofit their homes and save energy. Now, we're working with the dairy producers of this country in promoting digesters, methane digesters that will allow us to convert the methane produced from livestock waste and use it to produce energy. It's not just dairy, but also hog producers as well are beginning to incorporate this into their operations. In addition to the small grant and audit program that we also have our rural utility service that works very closely with utility industry in providing loan guarantees. Over $389 million of loan guarantees and loans to generate 288 megawatts of wind power, as well as several solar projects that are operating as a result of loans and grants from the Rural Utility Service. And also, at the same time, our Forest Service is intimately involved in working to utilize the woody biomass that's coming from hazardous fuel reduction efforts in our forests, in part because of the bark beetle infestation in the western part of the country. We have a tremendous amount of timber that we are going to have to reduce. We're going to have to take it out of the forest because it really does create a significant fire hazard to communities that are located near these forests that have been devastated by this infestation. And the question is, what do you do with this opportunity? How do you create biomass sufficient to produce power? We have 6 Forest Service projects in place as a result of the Recovery Act, helping to generate jobs, helping to reduce the hazardous fuel mix, at the same time producing the biomass for renewable energy. Probably the biggest opportunity that we have at USDA is in the biofuels area. We are challenged by the Congress to produce 36 billion gallons of biofuels from renewable sources. That represents about 25% of our overall fuel needs in the country. It's an ambitious goal to be reached by 2022. The economic impact of reaching that goal is roughly 1 million new jobs, most of which would be located in rural communities, and over $100 billion of capital investment. Extraordinarily important to the future, and extraordinarily important in creating opportunities for young people to be able to stay and raise their families in the communities in which they were raised. 21 billion of the 36 billion has to come from advanced biofuels, and that means that we really have to do a much more effective job of researching how we can use alternative feedstocks. And working with the Department of Energy, we have established 5 regional biomass research centers. In some cases, these are virtual research centers where information is being shared between researchers to identify the most effective and efficient way to produce these alternative feedstocks and produce these advanced biofuels. In addition, we're also encouraging producers in rural America to produce the feedstocks that can be used to produce either clean energy or renewable fuel. Our Bio Crop Assistance Program, BCAP, has already provided $240 million of assistance to producers, $200 million of which has gone to woody biomass production. We're going to continue to see this program operate to provide financial incentives so that there is a constant source of these new and alternative feedstocks. We're helping to build the infrastructure to convert these feedstocks into energy and fuel. We just announced recently 3 biorefinery projects in the southern part of the country, as well as over 60 feasibility studies in all parts of the country to determine how best to locate and where best to locate biorefineries and what feedstocks would be most appropriate for those biorefineries. We're trying to increase demand in terms of our own vehicle fleet, the federal vehicle fleet, as well as working with the Defense Department, specifically the Navy, to try to figure out how we might be able to generate more of the power needs that they have on bases and the fuel needs that they have on their bases and converting it to clean energy and biofuel, working specifically in the state of Hawaii with the Navy. And we're also working very closely with the aviation industry and the FAA to try to determine how we might be able to take 50% of the fuel needs for our jet planes and convert that into a renewable energy source or a biofuel. All of these activities fit into the framework that the President established. We're trying to use our resources in an effective way to leverage private sector investment so that we spend less but spend wisely. We are clearly investing in research and new opportunities so we can make, create, and innovate. And as a result of this, as Steve suggested, as these technologies become more efficient and more effective, we have extraordinary export opportunities. We already have in agriculture an extraordinary export story. While many segments of the economy are dealing with trade deficits, in agriculture, the United States of America has a trade surplus. We anticipate it'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 billion this year in terms of surplus. To put that in proper perspective, just 5 years ago, that surplus was $4 billion, so we've almost seen a tenfold increase in our surplus activities in agriculture. Every $1 billion of ag sales, and there'll be approximately $120 billion of sales this year, generates somewhere between 8,000 and 9,000 jobs. So this is a job creator, it's a wealth creator, and it's the right strategy to win the future. So we want to be part of this. We are sort of a junior partner with the Interior Department and the Department of Energy, but I think we play a significant role and hope that over the course of our discussions this morning that you'll learn a little bit more about all of the department's programs so that we can, as the President suggested, win the future for our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Now, we get to the fun part of the program, and since we're hosting this as an Interior, I get to ask the questions and they have to answer them, huh? Yeah, that's a fair trade. So these are questions from the audience, and there's a bunch of cards that are circulating around that are being collected. If somebody will bring those questions to me, we will go with them. But let me start with this one. First, Stephen Chu. So the President has said that we should double our clean energy electricity production by 2035. Your statistic there was that we are at 40%. So we go from 40% to 80%. What's to keep nuclear and natural gas from essentially swallowing up most of that 40% and essentially drowning out solar and geothermal and wind and other parts of the renewable energy portfolio?
Sure, that's a good question. It's a fact, though, that some states don't like nuclear, and they're not going to go near nuclear. Other states do like nuclear. I think we did some detailed simulations in the Department of Energy in helping structure these goals, and surprisingly, what we found, you'd think that if gas gets half credit, and given the low cost of gas today, that everything would actually naturally default to natural gas in future generation. The other thing I need to remind everybody is that we have a lot of old coal plants. Much of our fleet in coal plants is 40, 50 years old, and we're going to see massive retirements within the next 5, 8 years. And so the question is, what does one do? And surprisingly, what we found is and again, we have to work this out with Congress, But what we find is nuclear will grow, but wind will also grow, solar will grow in addition, and natural gas will grow. Coal will shrink a little bit until we develop those technologies that can use coal in a clean way with carbon capture and sequestration. But let me also remind you that eventually we're going to have to capture, by mid-century, we're going to have to capture the carbon dioxide from natural gas plants as well. So we think, at least in what simulations we could project, that everything will grow. It is very important that we grow all of these things. The renewables, in the end, especially solar, has the most, what I call, headroom in bringing down the costs and the most potential for technological development. And with that, if we can decrease the cost, as I said, by 75% or even 60%, it would be a game changer.
Ken, can I add just one comment to Steve's comment? And that is that I think we have to be very cognizant of the workforce needs to build these plants. It's a little bit easier to construct a windmill, potentially a little bit easier to build a solar farm, if you will, than it is to find the welders and the tradespeople that you need to have to build a nuclear power plant at an affordable cost. In talking to some of my energy friends, they tell me that the shortage of skilled tradespeople sometimes makes it difficult to predict the cost of one of these nuclear facilities. So it seems to me that what we have to have, and the President's right about this, we have to have a broad range a diverse way to get to this goal so that we can do things quickly and do things over the long haul, get the workforce trained to build these facilities.
So that's the reason why there's a broad energy portfolio that we're looking at and including everything. So let me ask you this question then, Tom Vilsack. You've been a key champion to biofuels and moving forward with biofuels. You saw the economy being ravaged around ethanol over the last several years. What gives you confidence that you'll be able to arrive at those ambitious goals that were set out by Congress to get to the 36 billion gallons of biofuels and advanced biofuels? And I'm ad-libbing a little bit, okay? Are you going to be able to actually put the advanced feedstocks into that biofuel pipeline to be able to arrive at those ambitious goals that Congress has set out for you?
Well, I don't think that, I don't want to be Pollyannish about this. This is a fairly significant goal, and the progress that we've made to date on the advanced biofuels needs to be accelerated in order to meet those goals. My confidence starts with the extraordinary research capacity that this country has, the innovative work that's already being done in the research labs that we have at USDA, the research labs that Steve's engaged in the private sector. It also is based on the extraordinary capacity of farmers, ranchers, and producers in this country to be innovative and creative and productive enough to be able to build the infrastructure, if you will, the crop production, the residue, the perennial grasses, the woody biomass, the algae, the whole series of choices that we have. I'm just very confident we will be able to use our land effectively to be able to produce the feedstocks without necessarily compromising the other needs that are important from rural lands, including our capacity to feed ourselves and the world. There has been a lot of discussion recently about whether or not there's a conflict there between those two goals. I don't see it because of the extraordinary productivity that's taken place. The science of agriculture, the productivity gains are nothing short of amazing. My lifetime corn production is up 300%, bean production up 200%, wheat production up 200%. And then when you start figuring out how you can use crop residue, how you can use non-productive lands more productively, there's just an extraordinary opportunity here. And it's been a long time coming in terms of rural America. We've had a tendency to disregard the economic capacity of rural America in the last several decades. And I think we're now beginning to understand that there's real opportunity there. So it's the innovative spirit of America and the ability of American farmers and ranchers to produce better than anybody else in the world that is the reason I'm confident we can get there.
Okay. Another one for you, and then I'll come back to Stephen, and I'll take a question too after that. One type of landscape, Tom Vilsack, that has great potential for siting and turbines on is agriculture. Due to the very small actual footprint of turbines and the ability of farms to grow among the turbines. What interagency action has been taken to encourage installation of wind farms on farmlands? That comes from Michael Craig from Oceana.
Well, first and foremost, it's the REAP program that I referred to earlier, encouraging farmers to take a look at how they might themselves be able to incorporate wind power, solar power into their own operations. With over 4,000 projects currently being funded and hundreds more in the pipeline, we're getting the message out to rural America that this is an economic opportunity, an opportunity for you to produce your own electricity and power for your own needs, potentially working with your local REC or your local utility company to use surplus on the grid that may potentially reduce and generate income for you. At the same time, there's extraordinary rental opportunities for the land that these turbines are located on. You can plant around those turbines so you don't lose much in terms of the productivity of your farm. So it's an additional income source. It's a way of reducing input costs and potentially generating yet another income opportunity in addition to the rental. So we're encouraging farmers to think about these kinds of things. And as they see their neighbors putting up a wind turbine, or as they see their neighbors leasing property to a utility company, and they start asking the questions, well, what are you getting? How much are you making? How difficult does it make your farming operation? They realize it really is a relatively simple thing to incorporate into their overall plan. And if there's any doubt about that, come to the Midwest and just drive through the state of Iowa into South Dakota. You're going to just see windmills and in farms all over the country.
And I think Iowa is number one in the country.
It was number one. It was, Texas and California have, Steve and I are going to probably disagree about this, but I got to stick up for my own home state. Those two larger states have greater capacity, but actually getting the power on the grid is the key, and Iowa actually has potentially an edge today. Now, California and Texas are clearly going to be significant producers of wind energy, but for a small state, Iowa's doing a pretty good job. And it was the partnership between state government and the private sector developing tax credit, tax policy similar to what the president is proposing, what you all talked about. It's that kind of partnership, leveraging additional resources, making it a little bit easier, less expensive for companies to make those investments that I think spurred a lot of activity in Iowa.
Let me just make a couple of comments on some of those questions. One is, for me, as a former U.S. Senator from Colorado, I remember traveling up and down the eastern plains of my state. Very dry and very poor and declining populations like much of rural America. And really what we have seen happen because of the wind energy and biofuels out in eastern Colorado is that it's come alive. And so you now have a thriving economy, which is much more diverse in what was one of the most challenging rural agricultural economies in our state. And so there is tremendous interest out there wherever I go around the country in terms of the work that is being done with biofuels and alternative energies and the technologies that are being developed out of the Department of Energy through the National Renewable Energy Labs and the demonstration projects that are going on with alternative feedstocks in places like Georgia and other places around the country. And another point that I would make is David Hayes and others who have worked with me on the issues relating to California water, where we face a very, very difficult conflict on the San Francisco Bay Delta. There is significant interest on the part of some of those landowners to retire some of the more marginal lands and actually provide a beneficial use with those marginal lands by putting into place large-scale solar production facilities on some of those lands. And so coming back to how there's a diversification and an opportunity here for rural Colorado that has many manifestations to it, I think is a real important point for clean energy and for rural America. Dr. Chu, this question is, what is being done at the Department of Energy to encourage and facilitate the production of energy where it is consumed, i.e. rooftop solar and wind, PV coatings for windows, smart grids, et cetera? Let me add just to whoever wrote that question that as you're thinking about that, Steve, you don't need to think long, I know, but one of the things that we do here in Interior is we work on some of the big projects, so we have, with your efforts, permitted what will be the largest solar power plant in the world in the deserts of California and in Nevada as well. But one of the questions that we often get, well, how about rooftop solar initiatives, and what are we doing as a country to create those kinds of opportunities?
Well, in terms of solar rooftops, first, the prices I talked about before were utility scale, where you can put it in low-cost land, places like deserts. But with rooftops, if you look at the cost of solar installations and rooftops, right now, the module is perhaps half or even less than half the cost of the full installation. It's permitting, sometimes municipalities require structural engineers. There's a lot of other things. I think homeowners may not know which ones to buy. They're not sure this is really going to work. And so as we develop solar power in general, that will bring the cost down. Now, we think probably right now the cost of installing rooftop solar is about $7 a watt. So if you want a typical couple thousand watt installation is a large hunk of change. Again, we're confident the price will come down by 50%. Even there, it's still pretty high. What I'm finding is the innovative businesses, I know a couple of businesses in California where they go to the homeowner and say, we will install the solar rooftop. You buy electricity from us, we'll at a rate, and it's close to, it's not quite, it's a little bit higher than what you would buy from your normal power company. But let's say it's within 10 or 15%, and you don't have to worry about it, you don't have to install it, you don't have to, we own it. If you want us to take it away, we'll take it away. And if you sell your house, we can figure out how to sell it to the next owner, or so on and so forth. And so these are ways in which it makes the owner not become an expert in photovoltaics, but actually say, okay, this is what I want to do, and with 10% in addition to your electricity fee, you can do this. As the price goes down, it's going to look better and better, especially if you have pricing. The most expensive electricity is on a hot summer day, and so it will become, as soon as it becomes economical to do it and you're saving money, then it flies, and that's what we're trying to do. So we're doing the research in order to make these things cheaper, but there's also very good business models being developed now in order to take the hassle and the knowledge factor out of it. Just say, I'm interested in electricity, and I'm interested in clean electricity. So a number of things, and we're trying to work, a lot of the things that are, sometimes a town will say, you want to put a solar module on your roof? Well, you should give us $400. We're trying to just encourage people not to do this, to decrease the barriers and the fees and everything. So it's all of those things.
Ken, a couple of things. Both Housing and Urban Development and USDA do a lot of home loans. And we're trying to figure out ways in which we can perhaps lend an additional few dollars to install that renewable energy source in a home, and then spread the cost of that either over the length of the mortgage, or in our case, working with rural electric companies over the course of time in terms of paying a utility bill. If what you install helps to reduce the utility company's capital investment in new plant construction, they have an economic incentive to encourage you to do this. They will lend you the money. They will, as a result of efforts that you are undertaking, not only renewable sources but energy efficiency, they will actually reduce your costs. And as your costs are reduced, your bill won't be reduced. They'll just simply take that additional savings and apply it to repaying the loan. So you make it as hassle-free, as Steve suggested, as possible.
All right, so we have questions for me too here. It says, access is a major concern for sportsmen. This is from the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Steve says, access is a major concern for sportsmen, and one of the reasons often given for decreased participation for hunting. Access is more than just accessibility, but having quality places that sportsmen seek out to hunt or fish. How is access and sportsmen's interests being addressed, and how are you going to sustain fish and wildlife during renewable energy development? Steve, stay tuned. First, let me just say, I think you will hear more from the President and from Tom and others Vilsack, who've been involved in America's Great Outdoors, an effort which Assistant Secretary Tom Strickland and others have been leading for the United States for the last year, and there'll be a major focus on that report with respect to sportsmen and hunting and opportunities around the legacy of Theodore Roosevelt and the conservation agenda for the 21st century, and those announcements, I think, are days away. But let me say that with respect to renewable energy and sportsmen and fish and wildlife issues, you'll hear from Dan Ash, the Director of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and Bob Abbey from the BLM and others as this conference goes on about guidelines that they are issuing to make sure that migratory birds are being protected, but also that we are taking the kinds of proactive steps in making sure that these renewable energy facilities are being sited in the right places. I think one of the things that we've learned over the last 2 years is we fast-tracked projects and we went through the right kind of environmental analysis, but I think before 2009, 2010, the public lands of this country at least were those who wanted to build some kind of a project. It was, whatever came in the door was basically looked at. And Bob Abbey coined the term here, smart from the start. And so what we've done both on the onshore and what we're doing with the Department of Energy in the offshore in the Atlantic is being smart from the start, looking at those areas where we can deconflict those areas and identify the areas that are the most promising for energy development. And that will be the case with respect to the onshore areas. And at least with respect to the wind farms that I have visited, many of them across the West, some of them in the Midwest, solar energy projects, we believe that conservation and access for hunters and anglers, that can coexist very well with our other national imperative here of standing up clean energy. Tom, do you want to comment on that from the agricultural point of view and access on farms and ranches for sportsmen?
Well, one of the things we're doing at the 193 million acres that we have responsibility for in the Forest Service is to make sure that as we figure out management strategies and utilization of the Forest Service lands, that we take into consideration all uses, not just recreational uses, but also the energy potential, and to try to figure out ways in which we can use these lands to maximize all opportunities. I don't think it's necessarily mutually exclusive that you either do energy or you do outdoor recreation. I think there are ways, as you suggested, Ken, for us to plan appropriately so that you can do both. And frankly, again, the rural economy needs us to do both. Outdoor recreation is a huge industry for this country. I've seen some estimates where it can be as much as $730 billion of economic activity focused on outdoor recreation. So it's obviously a very important component, and most of those dollars are being spent in rural communities. Many of them are being spent in rural communities. So we obviously don't want to discourage that. At the same time, as you pointed out, we do need to get the renewable energy from where it can be produced to where it can be used. That obviously involves transmission issues, and we've got to be very smart about where those transmission lines are located, and we've got to coordinate and integrate with what you're doing at BLM, what the private sector is doing on private lands, and what we can do at the Forest Service. I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Steve, let me ask a question that continues on Tom's last point, and that's transmission. I think ever since we have been talking about clean energy, we've seen transmission as a key component of the clean energy future. What are some of your thoughts about the transmission agenda and where we ought to be headed with that?
Well, right now, Department of Energy with FERC and with others, with in fact both of your agencies, are trying to figure out how you can construct a more coherent plan for transmission. People try to solve the transmission needs and distribution of electricity needs within their own little framework. And that is not really working if you consider renewable energies especially, because this really means transporting energy over long distances, across state boundaries, across PUC boundaries. And so in the Department of Energy, we're working towards bringing together groups and saying, okay, if you work together and coordinate things, instead of having lines crisscrossing across America, you build a line for a specific project. Let's think about where we want the lines going over, not only now, but in the next 5, 10, 20, even 50 years. And how do you actually plan for that? To encourage those groups, those entities, to get together and create a pool so they can cost those lines, so that the people who benefit from the generation of the energy, the receipt of the energy, and you have to benefit those states and those areas where you're transmitting across those, because you have a transmission line now in your backyard. So these are things that are very important. But in addition to that, the Department of Energy is taking a very deep role in saying it's just not transmission distribution, but it's how you actually, that transmission distribution line will coordinate between the variable sources of energy like wind and solar with energy on demand sources like our fossil fuel plants. And how you can actually coordinate those things so the two can work efficiently together. And that way you can capture much more of the energy you have. Right now, if you install a wind turbine and there's fluctuations in the wind, quite often we just feather the blades, we let the energy pass through because the system can't take it. And what we need to do is to figure out how to take all of that energy, because that means all of the investment on that wind turbine can be used. But that means you have to automatically coordinate with the fossil fuel plants. And so this is another area which we're determined to help. So transmission actually turns out to be an integration of the power system generation in the country as well.
We're getting close to the 10 o'clock time here, so I'm going to ask one question, and that is, what is the single most important thing that you think we could do to achieve the President's goal of doubling clean energy production for electricity by 2035? And so as you're thinking about that question, let me just read some of the other questions that have come in from the audience, so you'll see what some of you are asking. One question is, how can the administration ensure that private lands are included in planning for renewable energy with public plans? What improvements and streamlining can be done for wildlife review on private lands? Workshop coming up on that, I think, this afternoon or tomorrow morning. Next question, with only 8% of BLM land surveyed for historic and cultural resources, how are you planning to provide certainty for energy applicants and avoid citing projects on significant cultural landscapes and destroying irreplaceable archaeological resources? Stay tuned, there's a workshop. Bob Abbey, others are going to be talking about that specific issue a little later on. Secretary Chu, it is obvious that DOE is committed to R&D of renewable energy. What is DOE doing to support the deployment of renewable energy beyond the tax incentives? The sportsmen's issues, we already asked that question. Agriculture and siting on agricultural lands. What is, Secretary Chu, what is the pathway to achieve grid parity for solar energy technology? Grid parity, not grid party. We'll have a grid party when we get it all done, huh? But the pathway to achieve grid parity for solar energy technologies. From the Nature Conservancy, Bob Barnes. CEQ recently released new guidance on mentoring and mitigation in NEPA processes. What are your plans to modify your current NEPA regulations to implement the new guidance, especially for energy development? We have some workshops on that coming up here as well. For Secretary Salazar, you've had a lot of success in California and Nevada on renewable energy. How do we expand that success to the other 48 states? How much staffing do you need, Mr. Abbey? would get it done anyway. A key element of bringing new utility scale renewables is transmission. We've talked about that. What carrots can you all offer to staffs in the field to engage effectively? Renewable energy interests span those of industry, several federal agencies, the Department of Energy, the Department of Interior, FAA, FCC, DOD, as well as states and environmental organizations. What is being done to promote and facilitate effective communication among these parties inside the Beltway? What is the greatest challenge to reaching 80% clean energy by 2035? And there's other questions that continue. So we would ask you to fill out your cards if you haven't already, and we will have those printed up for all of us to take a look at, so we'll make sure that we at least have the questions and your thoughts in mind as we move forward and craft the clean energy agenda for the United States. So with that, I'm going to go in reverse order in which we opened up this part of the session, and I'm going to have Tom Vilsack answer the question, but also give his closing comment, and then we'll go to Stephen Chu, and then I'll close it up. So, Tom?
Ken, I think what we could do at USDA is to really continue to do what we've done to try to encourage our farmers and producers to understand the role that they can play in producing the feedstocks and the role that they can play as providing examples to their friends and neighbors about how renewable energy can be cost efficient as well as an income producing source. So a continued effort on REAP to educate farmers about the audit process and how renewable energy can be incorporated into their operations, and continued effort to try to promote the feedstocks that will be part of the biomass answer to a clean energy future. I think that's extraordinarily important for us to do, and it also obviously impacts the biofuel production as well. So I would say those two things are ways in which we can help meet the President's goal of a government that spends less but spends wisely, an economy that makes, creates, and innovates, and a nation that exports.
Stephen?
Well, I think the President proposed a solution in the State of the Union address. When he set this goal of going to 80% clean energy by 2035, he suggested that not only a goal, but make it a clean energy standard. And what that means is we don't care what type of clean energy it is, whether your state or region likes solar or wind or nuclear or clean coal when available, or and natural gas ultimately being, which is roughly a factor 2 cleaner than coal. And it said, whatever it is, to go from 40 to 80% ensures people who are developing these technologies and want to sell it, that they have a market, that each region, each state can sell into that. It's just like the biofuel standards, the blend of 10% ensures the farmers, they have a market to sell their biofuels into the natural blends. And so this clean energy standard will essentially say that between now and 2035, if you want to develop nuclear power, and this is a 10-year thing between the time you decide to apply for a permit to the time you might throw on your switch, you have a period of time in order to develop your plans. That's also true in solar and wind and everything else. So this creates a market. That means you can go, if you're a utility company, you can go to your rate commission and say, well, this is a requirement, this is what we need to do, but it creates enough time so that you create a low-cost path to that. And in doing this, in creating this market demand and creating deployment in the United States for all these clean energy sectors, that stimulates industry to say, okay, we're going to produce here in order to do this. We're going to have to invent certain things. We're going to have to invent, like the solar technologies. They exist today, but we think we can drive down those costs by inventing much better manufacturing techniques, perhaps newer designs of solar cells. All those things will say, if you can make it, you can sell it. You have to be competitive with the other forms of clean energy, and that's something which the President feels would be a huge draw and a huge stimulus.
Thank you, Steve. I think that the most important thing that could happen is that we have a clean energy standard that is in fact, something that gives us the steadiness of a long-term policy framework for the nation, because when you look back at the history of the clean energy efforts, we've been dealing with this issue for 40 years. It was Richard Nixon, after OPEC was created, that said we have to move forward with energy independence, and then Jimmy Carter, when he spoke about energy independence as the moral imperative of war. And we saw the Solar Energy Research Institute being stood up, I think, in 79 and 80. And yet through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the first part of this century, it's been starts and stops, starts and stops. And so, for industry, looking at production tax credits and ITCs and other incentives, sometimes they come on for a year, sometimes it'll be 2 years, but it's very difficult for anybody really to be able to make a long-term plan when you essentially have a policy framework that is at risk and changes from day to day. And so I think the President in the State of the Union calling for Congress to act on moving forward with a clean energy standard is something that is very important. And I think that if we can get there with this Congress, we will achieve this clean energy future and win the future, which the President spoke about so eloquently in his State of the Union. But it's also important, I think, for all of us here to recognize that these departments, as well as our other colleagues in the Cabinet, have not been waiting. We have not had energy legislation that the Congress has enacted in the last 2 years of great significance, and yet we have moved forward, moving forward with the R&D efforts at the Department of Energy, moving forward with the major biofuels efforts, which have really made some huge strides in the last year under Tom Vilsack and Lisa Jackson's leadership, and the efforts that we have going on here at Interior with the Department of Energy to demonstrate to the world that we can really get this done. For me, one of the most exciting things has been being in places like Nevada, California, Arizona, and Utah, and actually visiting solar power facilities which are generating 200 to 300 megawatts of power, and being at a groundbreaking where we actually saw a transmission line that was being built to transport clean energy. So I think one of the things that within our own executive power that the three of us have been committed to under the President's direction is that we do everything within the executive powers that we do have to make this clean energy future a reality. There's no accident as to why the President spoke about clean energy for such a long period in the State of the Union, and it's because he recognizes for this nation that to win the future, we need to win this race on the clean energy race for America. And so the three of us and all of the people who worked on this conference today and all of you who are here as stakeholders are very much a part of helping us move that agenda forward. So thank you all very much. Give my great colleague Tom Vilsack and Stephen Chu a round of applause for their great participation.
Thanks, Ken.
I forgot to say, this thing continues. So Steve Black, who has been the counselor on energy here at the department, will be moderating and staying with you, I think, for most of the next day and a half. And the panel that immediately follows will be moderated by Deputy Secretary of Interior David Hayes, and it will deal with many of the substantive issues that we have been learning about over the last several years. And one more thing, is Ryan Job somewhere in the audience? Ryan, are you here? Are you here, Ryan? He's back in the back. There he is. Ryan, come up here. I just want you to meet this young man. And one of the things the President has been very, very, very insistent upon with his cabinet is that we recognize our military families, that we recognize our veterans, and that we give them opportunities. Ryan is from Bayfield, Colorado, and Ryan has just joined the department as of yesterday as an intern with a master's degree in sustainability, but also has served our country in Iraq for a number of years. So give him a round of applause as we welcome him to the federal fund. This is Tom Vilsack. Stephen Chu. Welcome aboard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, Secretary Chu, and Secretary Vilsack. I think you'll agree we're off to a great start. We're a few minutes late. We're going to take a quick break. Please be back in your seats promptly at 10:15. I'll give a brief opening. We'll get started on the next panel. Thank you for being here.